Okay, picture this. A creature so colossal, it would just dwarf a modern elephant. Really massive.
Yeah, we're talking about length stretching, what, 21 to 23 meters?
That's a good 75 feet. And heavy, too, right? Like 16 to 22 tons on average.
Exactly. And incredibly, some fossil discoveries hint that certain individuals might have been even larger.
Bigger still, potentially getting up there with the truly gigantic titanosaurs.
Potentially, yes.
Yes.
But what's really captivating, I think, is that while this huge scale grabs your imagination straight away, the story of Apatosaurus is actually much richer than just being big.
Absolutely. Welcome, everyone, to the deep dive. Today, we're really getting into the world of Apatosaurus. And like you just said, this isn't simply a tale of a big dinosaur. The scientific sources we've looked at paint this fascinating picture, one of discovery, a classic mix-up over identity,
Right.
and a true giant that roamed North America way back in the late Jurassic, about 152 to 151 million years ago.
And these amazing creatures, they weren't just in one small spot either. They're fossils. They've been found across a pretty wide geographical area.
Where exactly?
Specifically within the Morrison Formation, which today, covers parts of Colorado, Oklahoma, New Mexico, Wyoming, Utah. Quite a range.
Okay, so our mission today, which you're already a part of just by listening, is to really unpack what makes Apatosaurus so unique.
Yeah.
We'll dig into its anatomy, explore what we think we know about its behavior, and really try to grasp its place in that ancient world.
And we definitely have to untangle that long-standing confusion surrounding it.
Oh, for sure. Okay, let's start unpacking. Starting with the name, Apatosaurus. Deceptive Lizard. Why deceptive? What's that about?
Well, the name, it was given by Othniel Charles Marsh back in 1877.
Marsh, okay.
And it came from some, unusual features he saw in the first fossils, particularly the chevron bone.
Chevrons. Those are the bones under the tail vertebrae.
That's right. Marsh noticed they looked quite a bit like those found in mosasaurs.
Mosasaurs, the big marine reptiles, not other dinosaurs.
Exactly. So hence the name Deceptive Lizard. It seemed to be misleading him.
Huh. So the very bones that helped identify it kind of pointed him the wrong way initially. That's ironic.
It is, yeah.
And how did the first actual discovery happen? Who found them?
That was in the spring of 1877, near Morrison, Colorado. A local guy named Arthur Lakes and his friend Henry C. Beckwith stumbled across the first Apatosaurus fossils.
Just stumbled across them. Wow.
Yeah. And Lakes, realizing they might be important, contacted two big paleontologists of the day.
Let me guess. Martian Cope.
You got it. Othniel Charles Marsh, who we just mentioned, and his big rival, Edward Drinker Cope.
Ah, the start of the legendary Bone Wars. So they were both scrambling to get these fossils.
Pretty much. Lakes ended up sending several fossils to both of them.
Okay.
But it was Marsh who first officially named a species from this material, Apatosaurus ajax. That was November 1877. He even hired Lakes to keep digging for him.
Right. And this initial period, it sounds like it was a bit chaotic. You mentioned mixed up bones, distinctions that didn't quite hold up.
Exactly. During the excavation and transport of the Ajax holotype.
And the holotype, that's the original specimen used to define the species, right?
Precisely. Well, its bones got mixed up with those from another Apatosauran individual, one that was initially described as Atlantosaurus immanis.
Oh, okay. So messy from the start.
Yeah, because of that early confusion, it's still actually tricky to definitively assign some of those first finds to one specimen or the other. And on top of that, Marsh first distinguished Apatosaurus from Atlantosaurus, another genus he'd named earlier,
Right.
based on the number of sacral vertebrae, the fused ones in the hips.
How many did he think each had?
He thought Apatosaurus had 3 and Atlantosaurus had 4.
Yeah.
But later research showed that wasn't really a reliable way to tell different sauropod groups apart back then. So a lot of those early classifications got questioned later on.
So a bit of a turbulent beginning for our deceptive lizard. But that's not even the most famous bit of deception or confusion in its story, is it?
No, absolutely not.
That has to be the Brontosaurus.
Ah, yes, the Brontosaurus. For so many people, that is the classic long-necked dinosaur.
Yeah, totally.
So 2 years after Marsh named Apatosaurus ajax in 1879, he announced another find, a bigger, more complete specimen from Como Bluff, Wyoming.
And this one he called?
This one he christened Brontosaurus excelsus.
Thunder lizard. I mean, it's an amazing name, you have to admit.
It really is iconic. So for a time, you had both Apatosaurus and Brontosaurus recognized in the scientific literature side by side.
Okay, so what changed? When did things get complicated?
The big moment came in 1903, There was a publication by Elmer Riggs.
Riggs.
He'd been studying a really well-preserved diplodocid skeleton from Colorado.
And diplodocid just means that family of long-necked dinosaurs, like Apatosaurus, Diplodocus.
Exactly, the long-necked herbivores, typically. Anyway, Riggs compared his find very carefully with both Brontosaurus excelsus and the original Apatosaurus ajax holotype.
What did he conclude?
He concluded that the ajax specimen, the first one Marsh named, it probably came from a juvenile, not a fully grown adult.
Oh.
So he argued that the differences Marsh saw between Apatosaurus and Brontosaurus weren't really about them being different types, just different ages.
Like trying to call a teenager a different species from an adult human.
Kind of, yeah. That's a good analogy. The differences were likely due to the Apatosaurus specimen just being younger and not fully developed.
Okay, that makes logical sense. But it's still amazing how long Brontosaurus stuck around in popular culture then. Why did it have such staying power?
That's a really good question. So based on his findings, Riggs proposed that Brontosaurus was what we call a junior synonym of Apatosaurus.
Meaning the earlier name takes priority.
Exactly. Apatosaurus was named first, so it had precedence. Riggs then officially reclassified Brontosaurus excelsus as Apatosaurus excelsus.
Right. Case closed, you'd think. Brontosaurus is now just Apatosaurus.
You would think. But no, the thunder lizard just refused to fade away quietly.
Why not? What kept it alive?
Well, despite Riggs's work and, the general scientific consensus that followed, the name Brontosaurus stayed incredibly popular. And a large part of that was down to Henry Fairfield Osborn.
Osborn at the American Museum of Natural History.
That's the one. Osborn, who wasn't exactly Marsh's biggest fan, by the way.
Ah, a bit of rivalry there, too.
Oh, yeah. Osborn famously put up this impressive Apatosaurus skeleton at the AMNH, but he labeled it Brontosaurus.
No way, even though scientifically it was supposed to be Apatosaurus by then?
Yep. A pretty bold move, really.
Yeah.
And because that mount was so prominent, so iconic.
It just cemented Brontosaurus in everyone's mind.
Absolutely. It became totally embedded in popular culture. You think about cartoons, kids' toys.
Yeah.
For generations, the default big long neck was a Brontosaurus. It wasn't really until the 1970s, thanks to paleontologists like John Stanton McIntosh and David Berman, that the scientific community really doubled down.
How so?
They reaffirmed Apatosaurus as the valid name, and crucially, they show that these dinosaurs had skulls like Diplodocus, not like Cambrisaurus, as had been mistakenly mounted on the AMNH specimen for years.
Which further linked it to Apatosaurus and away from the old incorrect Brontosaurus image.
Exactly. That seemed to finally solidify the synonymy.
But hold on, because the story takes another twist, doesn't it? Fairly recently, the Brontosaurus comeback.
This is where it gets really fascinating, yeah. 2015.
What happened?
A huge study came out by Emmanuel Chop, Ottavio Mateus, and Roger Benson. They did this incredibly detailed analysis of diplodocoid sauropods, basically looking at their family tree, their systematics.
Okay.
They looked at hundreds of morphological characteristics, tiny details of the bones across dozens of individual dinosaurs.
Right, the physical traits.
Yeah. And they proposed a new kind of quantitative way to decide what counts as a separate genus versus just a species, based on how many differences they found.
A specific number threshold?
Sort of. They found that Apatosaurus ajax and A. louisa, another recognized Apatosaurus species, differed in 12 characteristics based on their analysis. So they set a threshold. If two groups differed by 13 or more characters, they could maybe be considered separate genera.
Okay. So where did the original Brontosaurus excelsus land in this new system? Did it meet the threshold?
It did. Their analysis showed that the specimens previously called Apatosaurus excelsus had enough unique features.
How many?
Well, specifically, 13 differences compared to A. ajax and 12 compared to A. louisa, which was enough, by their new criteria, to justify pulling it out of Apatosaurus and putting it back into its own genus.
Wow. So Brontosaurus reborn.
Brontosaurus excelsus was back, scientifically speaking, according to this study. They also set criteria for species differences, and B. excelsus met those two compared to the other Apatosaurus species.
What were some of the key differences they pointed to? What made Brontosaurus distinct again?
They highlighted several things. One was the neck. They suggested Apatosaurus species had wider, probably more robust necks compared to Brontosaurus excelsus.
Wider necks, so maybe used differently?
Possibly. Maybe more built for vertical strength than Apatosaurus.
Yeah.
Well, Brontosaurus might have had slightly different mobility with a narrower structure. Just speculation, but based on the bones.
Interesting. What else?
They also pointed to specific differences in some of the back vertebrae, the posterior dorsals,
Okay.
and in the shoulder blade, the scapula. Even differences in the proportions of an ankle bone, the astragalus.
So quite a few detailed anatomical points, a full circle moment for the thunder lizard.
You could say that.
But as always in science, it's not always unanimous agreement, is it? Even with numbers, defining species and genera can be tricky.
That's absolutely right, yeah. While the 2015 study made huge waves, not all paleontologists were immediately convinced.
Like who? What were the counter-arguments?
Well, sauropod expert Michael Diemick, for instance, raised a good point about the criteria themselves. Were they a bit arbitrary?
Arbitrary how?
Like, why 13 differences for a genus? He cautioned that if someone else ran a similar analysis using slightly different methods or weighting characters differently...
Brontosaurus might just sink back into Apatosaurus again.
Exactly. And mammal paleontologist Donald Prothero also chimed in, suggesting the huge media hype around the study might have been a bit overblown given the potential for ongoing debate.
Right, so the Brontosaurus saga, maybe it's not quite finished yet, could still be evolving.
Very well could be. Science in action.
Okay, let's move past the name game for a bit and really dig into the physical characteristics that made Apatosaurus unique, whatever you call it. We heard robust.
Yes, anatomically, Apatosaurus had several features that really set it apart, especially from other diplodocids like Diplodocus.
Let's start with the neck and vertebrae. You mentioned wider.
Yeah, compared to Diplodocus, the neck vertebrae, the cervicals, were less elongated and noticeably more heavily built.
Heavier.
Yeah, more robust. And a key feature is this big trough running down the middle of the neural spines. Those are the bony bits sticking up.
Okay.
This created a really wide, deep neck cross-section, almost triangular, quite stout compared to the slender necks of, say, Diplodocus.
So stouter, wider, almost more like Camarasaurus in some ways, even though Camarasaurus had a much shorter neck overall.
Exactly. There are similarities in the vertebrae construction to Camarasaurus, which is interesting given the difference in neck length.
That's surprising. How did they carry such a heavy-looking neck? It must have weighed a ton.
Well, like many sauropods, they had a neat trick, an extensive system of air sacs connected to their lungs.
Air sacs, inside the bones.
You got it. These air sacs invaded the vertebrae, making the bones internally quite hollow, full of air spaces. We call it pneumaticity.
So like bird bones, lightweight but strong.
Precisely. It significantly cut down the weight of that massive neck. And it wasn't just about weight saving.
No. What else?
This avian-like system probably gave them a much more efficient respiratory system, too. Really important for such huge animals. Maybe in an atmosphere with less oxygen than today. And helping get rid of body heat.
Wow. Nature's engineering. Okay, What about the limbs? You said stockier than Diplodocus, too?
Yep, the leg bones were definitely stockier, even though overall they were longer than in Diplodocus. It just adds to that picture of a more powerfully built animal.
And the feet. Claws.
They had a single large claw on each front foot on the thumb, basically.
Yeah.
This is pretty common for sauropods, more advanced than, say, Shunosaurus.
Okay.
And then 3 claws on each hind foot. Interestingly, the forearm bones, the radius and ulna, they couldn't cross over each other. They were sort of locked in position. And the phalangeal formula, the number of bones in each finger, was 2, 1, 1, 1, 1 for the hand. So 2 bones in the thumb with the big claw, then just 1 bone in each of the other fingers.
Okay, 1 big thumb claw, then sort of stubby fingers.
Got it. Now moving to the other end, that famous tail, the whip tail. Ah, yes, another defining feature. Super long, tapering down to a very fine point, like a bullwhip.
And they held it off the ground.
Yeah, definitely held up, clear of the ground when walking. It got comparatively slender towards the tip because the vertebral spines, those upper projections, got much shorter further down the tail.
And the classic idea is that they used it like a whip, right? Making loud noises.
That was the long-standing hypothesis. Cracking it like a bullwhip, maybe creating incredibly loud sounds.
Yeah.
Possibly even supersonic cracks.
Seriously, a sonic boom from a dinosaur's tail.
That was the suggestion. Maybe for defense, maybe for communication.
Wow.
But more recently, there's been another idea gaining traction, or maybe an additional function.
Oh, what's that?
There's this growing hypothesis that the tail might have also been a sensory organ, a tactile organ.
Sensory? How?
The idea is that these sensitive tail tips could have helped individuals in a group stay in touch, literally.
Yeah.
Feeling the position of the animal behind or beside them while moving.
Like tapping each other to stay together, especially in migrations or something.
Exactly. Yeah. It could have been a low-energy way to maintain group cohesion, compared to constant visual monitoring or loud calls.
Huh. That's a completely different image. Not just solitary giants, but maybe creatures using touch to stay connected.
It really makes you rethink how they might have interacted, doesn't it? What other senses might have been important that we barely consider?
Totally. That's fascinating. You also mentioned something about a growth defect in the tail.
Yeah, it's interesting. Pathology, a defect, has been found in some Apatosaurus tail vertebrae.
What kind?
Two caudal vertebrae tail bones are just seamlessly fused together. Probably something went wrong during development. Maybe the disc or joint between them didn't form properly.
Little individual quirks, even in these giants. Okay, let's shift to the other end. The head. We touched on the skull confusion earlier.
Right. The skull of Apatosaurus was tiny, really remarkably small compared to its huge body.
And for ages, people got it wrong.
Yes, totally confused. For a long time, it was mixed up with skulls of Camarasaurus, even Brachiosaurus, big, boxy skulls, until a complete skull was found in 1909, just a few meters away from the A. louisei holotype. That finally cleared things up.
And what did it actually look like?
It turned out the Apatosaurus skull was much more like Diplodocus long, quite delicate, not boxy at all.
Okay. And the teeth inside that small head?
The jaws had these spatulate, sort of chisel-like teeth, clearly adapted for eating plants.
Chisel teeth. And the snout.
Very squared off at the front, almost like a shovel. Actually, only Nigersaurus had a squarer snout among dinosaurs we know of.
A square-snouted, chisel-toothed herbivore. What does the tooth wear tell us?
It's interesting. Studies on the enamel surfaces show they have this kind of sugary texture and very little wear.
Sugary texture.
Yeah, and not much scratching or pitting. It suggests they might have been stripping softer vegetation, maybe ferns or cycads, rather than grinding tough stuff.
Okay. And do we know anything about the brain?
We do, actually. We have a really well-preserved brain case from one specimen, BYU 196 inch. It shows the brain case shape, the morphology, was pretty similar to other diplodocoids. Nothing too surprising there, but good to confirm.
So small head, specialized teeth, probably stripping soft plants. That leads nicely into their lifestyle. Let's dive into their paleobiology, the study of their ancient life. What did these giants actually eat? How did they feed?
Well, Apatosaurus is generally considered a generalized browser.
Meaning it ate a variety of plants, not just one thing.
Exactly. That squared-off snout and the tooth microwear patterns point towards ground height, non-selective browsing.
Just mowing down whatever was low to the ground.
Probably munching on things like ferns, cycadoids, seed ferns, horsetails, maybe even algae near water sources.
Okay, but what about reaching higher? That long neck. Could they lift it up high?
That's still a big debate. The neck posture and feeding range. Some researchers look at the vertebrae and think the neck wasn't actually that flexible, especially vertically.
So they argue it was mostly a low browser, head held fairly level.
That's one view. It would certainly make pumping blood up to the head easier. But others argue, no, the neck was quite flexible, and they could definitely reach higher into the trees, giving them a much bigger feeding envelope.
So the jury's still out. Or maybe it could do both.
It's likely they had some flexibility, yeah. Maybe they primarily fed low, but could reach up when needed. The exact range is still debated.
A prehistoric grazing machine, maybe with an occasional reach. What about getting around? Did they just lumber slowly? Trackways must tell us something.
Yeah, sauropod trackways, and these likely include Apatosaurus, suggest they could cover a fair bit of ground, maybe 25 to 40 kilometers a day.
That's quite a trek. How fast could they move if they had to?
Estimates for top speed usually land somewhere between 20 and 30 kilometers per hour. Not super speedy, but faster than you might think for something so huge.
Definitely faster than walking pace. And wasn't there something about baby ones running on two legs?
Ah, yes. There's some speculation about juvenile Apatosaurus maybe being capable of brief periods of bipedalism.
Based on what?
Based on one particular trackway that seems to show only hind footprints for a stretch. But it's pretty disputed. Could be preservation issues or something else entirely.
A baby Bronto hopping along. Quite an image, though. Okay, thinking about their sheer size, their physiology must have been incredible. How did they even breathe effectively? How did their bodies work at that scale?
Yeah, the physiology of these giants poses some really interesting questions. Breathing, for example.
Right, how did they get enough oxygen?
Well, initially people thought maybe they had a more reptilian system like crocodiles, maybe without a diaphragm. But those air sacs we talked about in the bones, they strongly point towards a much more efficient bird-like respiratory system.
With air sacs throughout the body.
Yeah, multiple air sacs, probably a flow-through lung system where air moves in one direction, much better for extracting oxygen.
And maybe getting rid of heat, too. Being that big generates a lot of heat.
Exactly. That avian-like system would have been great for both oxygenating their huge bodies and for thermoregulation.
Okay, what about blood pressure? Getting blood way up to that head, even if held lowish.
Also a big challenge and debated topic. Some argue the near horizontal neck posture would have been almost essential to avoid needing impossibly high blood pressure.
Right, keep the head roughly level with the heart. Makes sense.
Yep.
And how much water would a 20-ton dinosaur need every day?
Estimates obviously vary a lot depending on what you assume about their metabolism and respiratory system.
Sure.
But one study, assuming that bird-like respiratory system but a more reptilian resting metabolism, suggested something like 260 liters of water per day.
Wow. That's a lot of drinking.
A very big water bottle needed.
Indeed. Okay, lastly on lifestyle. How did they grow so big? Did it take hundreds of years?
We can look at bone histology for that, the microscopic structure of the bones.
And what does it show?
It actually indicates pretty rapid growth early on. Apatosaurus seems to have reached near adult size in maybe just 10 years or so.
Only 10 years. That's incredibly fast.
Yeah. One study using growth lines in the bones estimated they could hit 25 tons in about 15 years.
Wow.
And during their peak growth spurt, they might have been putting on weight at a rate of 5,000 kilograms per year.
5 tons a year. Good grief.
I know. Other methods suggest maybe they reached full mass sometime before they were 70 years old, continuing slower growth for longer. But these estimates can be a bit unreliable because bones constantly remodel themselves as an animal lives, and that can erase the earlier growth lines.
Ah, okay. So fast growth is likely, but the exact timing is tricky. Did they change shape much as they grew?
Yeah, we know the number of sacral vertebrae increased as they matured, fusing up to 5 in adults.
Yeah.
And we actually have a decent amount of juvenile Apatosaurus fossils.
Oh, cool. What were the young ones like?
They tended to have proportionally shorter necks and tails compared to the adults, and also a bigger difference in length between their front legs and back legs. More disparity.
So kind of different proportions when young. Okay. Fast-growing giants, probably not living for centuries based on what we know now. Let's zoom out. Put Apatosaurus in its world. It's paleoecology. What was the late Jurassic Morrison Formation actually like?
Okay, so the Morrison Formation, it represents a time from about 156 down to maybe 147 million years ago. Late Jurassic.
And the environment?
It was a mix of shallow marine and alluvial sediments, stuff laid down by rivers. The climate is thought to have been semi-arid, probably with distinct wet and dry seasons.
Like a savanna, maybe, but with swamps and rivers.
Something like that. The Morrison Basin was huge, covering a big chunk of western North America. You had rivers flowing down from the early versions of the Rocky Mountains,
Right.
carrying sediment into these vast floodplains with swampy lowlands, lakes, and river channels. It's actually similar in age and sometimes in fauna to places like the Larinham Formation in Portugal and the Tendaguru in Tanzania.
Interesting global connections. Okay, so rivers, swamps, seasonal climate. Where did Apatosaurus fit in this picture? Was it common? Did it prefer certain areas?
It was actually the second most common sauropod found in the Morrison ecosystem.
Second most. Who was number one?
Camarasaurus. But Apatosaurus was definitely a major player. Now, about being solitary.
Yeah, you mentioned that earlier, and the tail-touching idea. Does the fossil distribution support them being less herd-like than others?
Well, the evidence is suggestive, perhaps, compared to, say, Camarasaurus, which is often found in bone beds suggesting groups died together. Apatosaurus finds are sometimes more isolated. It's not conclusive, but it fits that picture a little.
And where in the Morrison are they found, time-wise?
Mostly in the upper levels of the formation. Specifically, the upper part of the brushy basin member, which dates to around 152, 151 million years ago. And one species, Apatosaurus louisi, is actually quite rare, known mainly from just one site.
Okay. And who else was living there? It wasn't just Apatosaurus and Camarasaurus, right? You mentioned predators, Allosaurus.
Oh, yeah, the Morrison was absolutely packed with dinosaurs. Huge diversity.
Right.
For the big predators, the theropods. You definitely had Allosaurus, which was very common. Also Ceratosaurus with its nose horn. Ornitholestes, which was smaller, and the really massive Torvosaurus.
What a dangerous place to be a plant eater.
For sure.
Right.
And other sauropods alongside Apatosaurus and Camarasaurus included Brontosaurus, if we accept that 2015 study.
Right.
Plus Brachiosaurus with its high shoulders and the classic Diplodocus.
Wow, what a lineup of giants. Any other plant eaters?
Yep. Plenty of ornithischians, the bird-hipped dinosaurs, things like Camptosaurus, the speedy Dryosaurus, and of course the iconic plated Stegosaurus.
Stegosaurus. So Apatosaurus lived alongside Stegosaurus and Allosaurus.
Definitely. Apatosaurus fossils are very commonly found at the same sites as Allosaurus, Camarasaurus, Diplodocus, and Stegosaurus. They clearly shared the same habitats.
Any fossil evidence of encounters, like bite marks from Allosaurus on Apatosaurus bones?
That's a great question. Bite marks attributed to Allosaurus are found on bones of various Morrison dinosaurs, including sauropods. Finding them specifically on Apatosaurus and proving predation versus scavenging is harder, but it's highly likely Allosaurus preyed on them, especially younger or weaker individuals.
Makes sense. And beyond dinosaurs, what else lived there?
Oh, the whole ecosystem. Fish, frogs, salamanders, turtles, lizards, early crocodile relatives, crocodilomorphs, flying pterosaurs, and of course the plants they all depended on. Ferns, horsetails, cycads, conifers, ginkgos. A rich, complex world.
A truly lost world. Okay, let's try and bring this all together. What are the absolute key things we should take away about Apatosaurus from this deep dive?
Okay, well, fundamentally, Apatosaurus was this enormous plant-eating sauropod in North America during the late Jurassic. Key features: its sheer size, its robust build compared to relatives like Diplodocus, and that distinctive long whip-like tail.
Right.
Then there's the whole naming saga. The rivalry, the Brontosaurus confusion, a story that's still unfolding, really.
The Deceptive Lizard, indeed.
Exactly. Anatomically, remember the wide, stout neck, the strong limbs, and that small, Diplodocus-like head with the chisel teeth for browsing. Lifestyle-wise, think generalized plant eater, covering decent distances daily with this incredible physiology adapted for huge size, including that efficient bird-like breathing system.
And living in that diverse Morrison ecosystem alongside predators like Allosaurus and other icons like Stegosaurus.
Precisely. It was a key part of that famous fauna.
Its story really has been full of surprises, hasn't it? From the name meaning Deceptive Lizard, which turned out to be apt in ways Marsh never intended with the whole Brontosaurus thing. And our understanding just keeps changing as we find more and look closer at what we already have.
And that actually raises a really important final thought, I think.
Go on.
If we consider that latest idea about the tail, potentially being used as a tactile sensory organ for group cohesion, how might that completely change how we picture these giants interacting?
Right, not just solitary behemoths wandering alone.
Exactly. If they were using touch in that way, maybe subtly communicating through their tails, what other senses might we be massively underestimating in these animals? Could they have perceived their world, communicated within their groups in ways we just haven't even conceived of yet?
That is a fascinating question to ponder. What other sensory worlds existed back then that we're only just starting to glimpse? It really highlights how much we still have to learn.
Absolutely. Paleontology is always evolving.
Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the incredible life and times of Apatosaurus. We hope it sparked your curiosity. Keep exploring the world of dinosaur science. There are always new discoveries and debates just around the corner. You really never know what secrets the next fossil find might unlock.